Hello, I'm Mark Jeeves, and tonight we're celebrating 50 years of one of rock's most culturally significant albums.
Dark Side of the Moon was an expression of political, philosophical, humanitarian empathy that was desperate to get out.
Dark Side, I think it felt like the whole band were working together. It was a very creative time. We're all very open as well.
I think because we still had a common goal.
All four of us were there, and there was a discussion about putting the album together and making it into this themed, what is now called a concept album.
14 times platinum, and with more than 45 million copies sold worldwide, this is The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd.
Race towards an early grave.
The opening tracks to Pink Floyd's 1973 masterpiece, Dark Side of the Moon, an album which follows a number of major themes, particularly from the mind of Roger Waters.
Madness, isolation, alienation, sadness are in fact brought to you as a listener with music which is often very warm and rather joyous.
There are a number of things that impinge upon an individual that colour his view of existence. There are pressures that are capable of pushing you in one direction or another, whether they push you towards insanity, death, empathy, greed, whatever. This is what this record is about.
Now, whilst this is widely considered one of the greatest and most extraordinary records of all time, the album only occupied the top spot in the charts for 1 week. However, it remained in the US top 200 chart for a massive 736 weeks, only to lose its place after a rule change in 1988. Here's drummer Nick Mason explaining why he thinks the album has been so successful over the years.
There isn't a single reason why the album has lasted so well. I think it's the fact that actually what happened was 5 or 6 different things all came together in one record. So there was the quality of the engineering from Alan Parsons, which a lot of people talk about it as a stereo test record, which is one thing. There's the quality of Roger's writing, which I think is very important because, you have to remember that those lyrics were written by a sort of 20-something-year-old, whereas actually they're as relevant now to a 50 or 60-year-old, particularly a song like Time. So you've got that. You've got some great playing from David and Rick, and obviously my own modest contribution.
Of course.
So it's the very best of sort of Abbey Road's technical department. And so I think that is my sort of position on it, really. It's not one secret thing. It's actually all those things coming together.
Taking away the moments that we spoken magic spell.
That's Time, from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, here on Planet Rock. And we're going to continue our celebration of this classic album in just a short while and hear David Gilmour discussing the genius that was Rick Wright. This is Planet Rock, where we're celebrating Pink Floyd's 1973 masterpiece, Dark Side of the Moon. Now, next up is one of 3 Floyd tracks to feature vocals from a non-band member. And it was producer Alan Parsons who first suggested Claire Torrey, who'd previously worked on one of the Top of the Pops covers albums he produced. However, it's undoubtedly the piano and organ work of Rick Wright that makes this such a standout track, as David Gilmour explains.
It's hard to pin down, Rick wrote a lot of beautiful pieces of music, obviously The Great Gig in the Sky is one of those things, but he is an integral part of the flavor of pretty much everything we've ever put out, and sometimes in all the noise that Roger and I tend to make, verbally and in the press and on the records, he tends to get slightly overlooked, but his part has always been there on everything you hear, and it's him, it's idiosyncratic, it's different to any other player, and I would say that Great Gig in the Skies is one of his finest moments.
The Great Gig in the Sky, marking the end of side 1 and, as a result, the only gap between tracks on the original pressing of Dark Side of the Moon. Right now, we're moving on to the first single and probably best known track from the album. In this particular track, Money, it's described as the root of all evil today. Ironic when considering its release made Pink Floyd one of the richest bands in the world. We're taking a look back at one of rock's greatest ever albums, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, here on Planet Rock. And you can't really talk about Dark Side of the Moon without picturing that fabulous album cover. The beam of white light emerging with multicolours through a spectrum is one of just many iconic images in rock. And graphic designer Storm Thorgerson worked with the likes of Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath and Genesis, to name just a few. He's probably best known, though, for his work with Pink Floyd, and here he told us what inspired him.
Mostly from lyrics and conversations. And these conversations may be protracted or they may be very brief, because you never know what a musician's going to be bothered to tell you or what they feel like telling you. So in a way, I get to hear the music early, I get to talk to the musicians, I get as much as I can and use all of it. And I feel as though the music is what fundamentally informs the design, but it's more like a background. It's not normally the thing that did it. It could be a title, it could be a phrase, it could be a line of lyric that does some particular trick at some particular time, but the music is always there because it's we play it endlessly. And I feel as though that if I can play the music enough, in the car or at home or in the studio, it'll become part of me temporarily.
Taking a look back at one of rock's greatest ever albums, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, a record the band looks back on fondly.
It was a very, very happy and creative and enjoyable time when we made this album.
It was probably the most focused moment in our career in terms of all of us working together as a band.
I can clearly remember that moment of sitting and listening to the whole mix all the way through and thinking, my God, we've really done something fantastic here.
There's nothing plastic about it, there's nothing contrived about it. And I think that's what has given it or maybe one of the things that's given it its longevity.
Now, before we move on to the final two tracks from side two, Roger Waters talks about how he reflects on the success of the album.
I did a tour that finished a couple of years ago where I did the whole of Dark Side of the Moon as one half of the show. And I had been somewhat reluctant to take that whole kind of classical piece and to redo it, but I took a deep breath and did it, and it really worked well. And then, like any art that is successful, people recognize the truth of the expression of the emotions in the thing. It just rings true. You can tell whether things are real or they're not. I think that's what appeals to people, is that in my work, is that they recognize that it's real. It's not invented. It's not artificial in any way. It's sort of real and raw. And when you see, it's like when we read Cormac McCarthy, we recognize the extraordinary way he has of expressing the reality of his feelings through the narratives that he describes to us. And that's what makes it art, and that's what makes it important to us.
Rounding off our celebration of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, that's Brain Damage and Eclipse on Planet Rock.